Hello, dancers of the circle, wild women, wise women, and witches, and a special hi to the new folks in priesthood of the sacred earth. For our content today, for this week, I wanted to just briefly run through about 4 different ways that you can begin your work with elemental energies. Now, the idea with all elemental energies is that we connect to them via these properties within ourselves. And there's a lot of study in that direction, academic study in that direction that you can follow. So that would be one of the first ways I would mention, the 4 elemental rulers of occult philosophy as penned by Agrippa. So you can start with something like that where each element has this kind of anthropomorphic form, only a little bit different, a little bit more magical, and not releasing of the kind of pre-Christian concepts of what earth elementals might look like, which is really cool. So for instance, you have Gob in the earth, and he's the king of the gnomes. And you have Degen in the south, and he's king of the salamanders and the element of fire. So they have these forms, and they have obviously different artistic interpretations of what they might look like. But similar to what we would, consider it as fae or nature spirits, that kind of thing. Only it's been very formalized, obviously, in ceremonial ritual when we talk about working with these 4 occult elemental rulers. But you can also work with them very well in just an animistic witch practice. So learning about those 4 would be great. And of course, I've got some previous lessons on that you're going to want to go check out. I just recently reposted an invocation to God that kind of starts you with the ways you might want to approach actually working with these particular elemental rulers who have a firm form and interaction with many magicians of previous centuries. So they have some strong, empowered forms. So check that out. And another consideration too would be journaling. Okay, so when you start a lot of your esoteric practices with something like a coven or a temple or a grove or that kind of thing, you get a lot of teachings about earth, air, water, and fire. So one of the things that I was taught to do, one of the things I have actually passed on to most of my students, is journaling, having an elemental journal. You can have one for each element. Like when I did it, I had a little red notebook for fire and a little blue notebook for water, etc. But the idea being, you take a deeper dive into how you experience the elements. For instance, obviously, I'm going to say in my journal for water, a brook, but also a cup of coffee, or the idea of fluidity. So the idea of maybe neon, running through a tube would still very much also include a kind of a water experience because of flow, and flow being associated with water. So you kind of take these deep dives and you just carry them around with you. I use just a small notebooks, this flip kinds. So that's a good way. It's more of an intellectual exercise, but that's how we kind of start reprogramming our brain to approach and interact with these energies in a more nuanced and deeper way. So journaling is a great way to do it. And then, of course, invocations. So previously we had the invocation to God that I just referenced. But there's other ways to do invocations for earth energies. So you can choose, for instance, if you are into totemism or really like the use of sacred animals, you could use, for instance, a bear in the north and a salmon in the west if you were a druid, that kind of thing. So there's all kinds of invocations you can do to those elemental energies. It doesn't have to always be, I invoke water. It can be, I invoke the spirit of the salmon. I invoke the wisdom of the owl. That kind of thing. So let's run through those 3. We've got the idea of going up and looking up the occult literature associated with the elemental rulers. Then we've also got the idea of journaling, which is, it kind of makes it a very personal relationship between you and the element. When you pull that little book out and think about your connection to what you're writing down, then you have to really think about it. So always very good. And of course, the magical invocations. You can use deities for those as well. And finally, of course, the very best way would be simply to get out in nature because it is everywhere around you. Now, I realize in urban areas it might be a little bit more complicated to experience the elements outside, but you can still do it within. You can do it having a nice little water fountain in your apartment, or even a vase of flowers, for the water element. And you can, the candle for fire is still a flame. If you want to put a candle in the middle of your table and pretend you're having a small bonfire, that's still connected to that element. So work within your limitations. I'm fortunate to live in the Great Smoky Mountains, so one of my favorite things to do is to go and sit on a rock in the middle of the river, um, feel that sun and that heat in the filtering of the light through the trees, hear the river and feel the wind and the breeze that's created by the rolling river. That's obviously the best way to experience the elementals. So ultimately what happens when you start doing these types of practices, you'll come to a point where you're stepping into a circle to do a ritual, and let's say you are doing it to the 4 elemental rulers of the occult. Your experience of them becomes more expanded. You go to that quarter and you deal with that water in the west, and it's more than just the fact that it's an elemental or that it's Nixa, which is the occult ruler. It can also be a very personal thing. You might have your own name for the water spirits of your land that starts coming through with those types of connections. So what it does is it just expands your perspective to have these exercises. And they can be very simple. They can be incorporated into your daily routine pretty easily, obviously, except for maybe the nature bit if you have to wait till the weekends or maybe vacation to get a real taste of nature, but get out there and do it. So if you have any questions, let me know, but I just wanted to provide a few suggestions to start. If there's other things that you could suggest that helped you get started with your connections with elementals, please feel free to share it. Everybody has their thing that works best for them, so keep that in mind as well. And look forward to sharing with you next week, and everybody have a good week.